Good afternoon, good morning for some of you, and good evening for at least one, as we have people who are dialed in from all over the United States and some folks from Europe to attend this presentation of CR Magazine's What Makes a Good Corporate Citizen. I am Elliot Clark. I am the CEO of Shared Expertise. We are the publishers of Corporate Responsibility, or CR Magazine. We are the organizers of the Commit Forum, and we are the managers of the Corporate Responsibility Officers Association, soon to be the Corporate Responsibility Association, as that rebranding is scheduled to take place shortly. I'm joined today by Glenn Yelton, a very valuable partner of ours, research manager for IWF, which helps us develop the 100 Best Corporate Citizens list. Good afternoon, Glenn. Thank you for joining me.
Afternoon, Elliot.
All right, Glenn, we're going to talk about the 100 Best Corporate Citizens list, and we're very shortly going to come out early next week announcing the location of it. This has been an annual hallmark event for us, and I know there was some confusion based on the questions we got before the event as to whether we would actually be doing the reveal on the list today. So I just want to, first of all, let everyone know that we will very shortly be addressing who are the top 5 companies. All right, so stay tuned. It's a lot like Corporate Citizen Idol. Okay, we'll give you information about who did what after the commercial break. So there we go, the announcement next week. We also, for the commercial break, want to remind you about the Commit Forum. It's coming up in 2014. You know, the theme, once again, good business makes the difference. Last year we had a stellar cast of experts in corporate responsibility. We had 9 CEOs appear during the conference to talk about what was taking place within their organization. It ended with a gala, Responsible CEO of the Year dinner. This year we are returning to the New York Downtown Marriott, October 8th and 9th. Please register now, as there are special availabilities for people who register early. In addition, if you are not already a member of the Corporate Responsibilities Officers Association, please contact Allie Williams at our office to talk about joining. Basically, this association promotes the practice and profession of corporate responsibility. Many of your colleagues, people you want to know in this industry, people you want to network with, and people you want to learn from are members of the Corporate Responsibility Officers Association. We're very proud of our affiliation with this nonprofit, and we look forward to having all of you essentially take part in the CROA and really contribute and learn from the conversation, because everyone who comes to one of these association or committee meetings not only has the opportunity to learn from each other, they bring something that your colleagues need to hear, and we all do better as a result of it. So on to the top 5. Well, we'll tell you who that is when we do the announcement, so you'd best be there, right, Glenn? You know, it would be too easy if we told everyone today. Today, what we really want to do is we want to talk about methodology. We want to help you, and we want to do this early in the year, because to give you the folks some idea, there's literally about over 300 data points, actually 315 data points we look at for each organization. The IWF folks do this for the entire Russell 1000. We only reveal the top 100. So there's 315,000 data points evaluated, okay? And we're going to talk about the methodology. As you can recognize, this is a sweeping effort. And for folks to improve their scores year over year, you know, it takes a while to get all of that, information out. because a lot of what we're looking at with the 100 Best Corporate Citizens list is transparency. Have you been transparent with your employees, with your stakeholders, with your shareholders, et cetera? So we wanted to give people early in the year the opportunity to understand what they needed to do so that through the year you could make this part of your 2014 initiatives. So let's talk about the methodology. So if you look at it, we have a common mission. Corporate Responsibility Magazine and the CROA, which we manage, are essentially advancing corporate accountability and responsibility. The methodology fulfills that purpose by allowing us to measure the degree that organizations are holding themselves accountable and let others hold them accountable by essentially providing the data about their operations, about their environmental impacts, about their employee relations, about their human rights agenda. We're going to look at all of those in the course of this evaluation, but this methodology essentially fulfills that purpose of accountability through transparency. This is a joint effort. The CROA committee advises on the methodology to ensure its relevance, transparency, and efficacy. We have a great group of advisory panel members through that committee. If it's something that you believe you can contribute to or learn from, by all means, contact, it's Allie, ALLIE.Williams at sharedexpertise.com and express your interest in being part of the Ratings and Rankings Committee, because we're not only looking at the methodology of the 100 best, we're looking at what, how everyone can do better on all the various ratings and rankings that are out there. One thing to bear in mind that is unique to our particular entry in the rankings pantheon, because I know many of you are doing a lot of these programs for not only us but with others, is that CR Magazine is really the only one that does not allow you to self-report on a questionnaire. This is based entirely on what you have out there in the way of disclosures, and we're going to go and get the data. You don't have to do any submissions to us. All you have to do is review and verify your findings. If, in fact, you don't have that information disclosed at the time that we do the data gathering, you can't really correct it later. You can only point us to where it may or may not be. That's a unique feature of this, particular ranking, and we are proud of it. And we go to great lengths to reveal every single data point that we're using. I just want to let people know, if you have questions, there is on your interface a box where you can type a message and send it to us. We will be taking questions at the end of this presentation. Either myself or Glenn will be happy to answer them for you. And just to be clear, we are on the, it's about 12:10, so I'll do what we call in radio the reset. This is the CR Magazine's What Makes a Good Corporate Citizen presentation. I'm Elliot Clark, CEO of Shared Expertise, and I'm joined by Glenn Yelton, the Research Manager of IW Financial. So what CR Magazine does in the process, and Glenn's going to get into the real details of it in just a moment. We seek to maintain consistency year over year. It also gives us the opportunity to analyze normative data, compare it to the market. Changes across any aspect of the methodology are revealed. These may be changes to the main categories or the category weights. The data elements, sometimes there are additional data elements added. Sometimes there's modest changes in the methodology of how those data elements are plugged into the formulas. These are things that we do with advice and guidance from the CROA's Ratings and Rankings Committee that helps us with methodology. And then we also put out these files for your comment. if you will. So, Glenn, why don't we talk about the data?
Okay.
Tell us where you get them, and what does IW, what role do you folks play? And tell us a little bit about IW for folks who are on the phone.
All right, Elliot, thanks for the introduction on that. Again, I'm Glenn Yelton. I'm the research manager with IW Financial. We are an analysis firm working in the environmental, social, and governance space, the ESG investment community. We actually collect data on the full Russell 3000 of companies, but for purposes of supporting CR Magazine, we focus on the data that we collect on the Russell 1000. The data collection effort is focused largely on publicly available data. We do a correspondence process with companies, which I'll talk about a little bit more as we go through this, so that they have an opportunity to review the data. Elliot did steal some of my thunder a moment ago. There are 315 elements that are used for the evaluation in the categories. They roll up into 298 separate rated pieces. So at the advice of the methodology committee, there were 17 elements for the 2014 evaluation that were actually consolidated. These elements fall into 7 broad categories: climate change, employer relations, environment, financial, governance, human rights, and philanthropy. There are varied weightings within those categories, and I'll talk a little bit about how those decisions were made and how those are weighted here in just a few minutes. I joke with the folks over at CR Magazine that this list is both a highlight and a pain in my rear every year. It's a highlight because after it rolls out, there are 100 press releases that go out of companies that have proud to be on the list, and I immediately in the upcoming week get about 40 emails from companies asking why did we not make the list. So hopefully some of those questions may be addressed in what we're talking about today. So Elliot, can we move to the next slide? So within the 298 data categories, or sorry, 298 data elements in 7 categories, typically those are divided into 3 subcategories. There's performance, policy, and disclosure. A lot of the elements that are evaluated for the CR Magazine 100 do focus on disclosure. It focuses on the transparency of a company's communication with all of its stakeholder groups. We look for, we take basically the approach on the data collection of what would my mom find if she looked at this company. So it's not a lot of very sophisticated directed searches. It's not direct to analyst communication. It is what the company's communication that's readily available is. So disclosure policy is an evaluation of the company's policies on particular areas of concern. Does the company have an environmental policy? If so, what are the attributes? Do they have a climate change policy, human rights, et cetera? And then we also, in support of this, look at some performance elements, things like total GHG emissions, direct and indirect. The data that is collected tends to fall into 2 different categories. There's binary data, either the data is there or it is not, or there is numerical data. Numerical data we evaluate on a ranked scale, with all companies that have disclosed numeric data automatically ranking higher than companies that do not disclose data whatsoever. And this is to recognize, again, that focus on transparency that is a real emphasis behind this particular list. Ellie, can we move on to the next one? The data that we collect in support of this, like I said, comes from publicly available sources. We look at the company's websites. We look at the sustainability reports. We look at the 10K other annual filings, the DEF 14A. And we also rely on other public sources. And there are some categories that we very heavily rely on other public sources. For the financials category, that data is pulled from Morningstar. And that data is actually pulled on the first trading day of December in the month or in the year for which the data is being collected. We pull corporate governance data from a strategic partner named Glass Lewis & Company out of San Francisco. And on the topic of philanthropy, which is one of the 7 categories, we do pull data from an organization called Foundation Center, and they're focused on grant seekers. And we use their data to fill in the blanks where companies don't have directly disclosed data. Next slide, please. We use pretty much an...
Glenn, just to make it clear, we reveal in CR Magazine a great deal of information about those sources, and then anyone who wants to get the specific list on where the data points come from can contact IWF, correct?
Yes, and it's also available on CR Magazine's website. As Elliot said earlier, the methodology is completely transparent. If you go to the CR Magazine's website and go under the Best 100, you'll find a complete explication of the methodology. And down towards the very bottom of that, there'll be a series of PDF files, one of which includes every single data element that is collected and how it's categorized in disclosure, policy, performance, and which of the 7 categories it falls under. So it's a very open process, and as the 2014 list rolls out, you guys have to stay tuned for that particular list. All the changes that happen for the methodology will, again, be posted. There'll be an update, and the set of data points used for that, again, will be updated and posted so it's available for public consumption. It's useful at this point in the year, again, as Elliot pointed out, for individuals and organizations interested in this, actually take a look at that. Once the list is posted, everything's updated, and it's out there. As you're looking at your efforts through the year, that's basically 95% of what this list is going to look like in the next year. The approach that the Methodology Committee has historically taken with this has been very much an evolutionary change to the evaluation system as opposed to a revolutionary. It stays an open system so that everyone who's interested can take a look at the data elements, and you're never going to see a complete category just suddenly pop up. There will always be a public comment period. It will always be out there. And again, it's an evolutionary as opposed to a revolutionary approach to the methodology. The data collection, again, we look at publicly available sources, and we use a pretty standard in the industry approach to how that data is verified. Researcher A covers the company, so they cover Acme Company. They go through the CSR report, the website. They pull in the CDP data. They pull in data from Morningstar, Glasslist, et cetera, compile that as basically the dossier on that company. That's then reviewed by another researcher for accuracy, make sure that everything lines up with our methodology, so internally we have a 2-step verification process. IW reaches out to every company in the Russell 1000, the evaluated universe, and gives them an opportunity to review this data. In support of the 2014 list, there were actually 241 companies out of the Russell 1000 who asked to receive and review the data. So slightly less than 25% of the target universe actually received the data, looked at it, and of those, 96 came back with corrections, changes, and questions. So about 10% of the companies actively engaged on this. Prior to this call, since the beginning of the year, I've actually held 27 calls with companies directly to talk to them about this particular methodology. And that's always available for those of you on the call. After this, if there's still questions, as you get further in the year, if you want more guidance or you want to understand how this is done, you can reach out to Allie, to myself, or to Larry Bassinet at CR Magazine. We'd be happy to have a call and talk to you a little bit more about the methodology. When we receive the responses back from the companies, we actually, as a final piece, we will send that back to the companies that have responded with clear details on which changes, which suggestions were in fact included, and which were not. And next slide, please. And we don't wholesale select or accept all suggestions from companies. It still needs to meet the methodology. It must be publicly available and must be publicly available as of the time the data was compiled. And by publicly available, I mean it must be on a website or an available report. It can't be something that's provided directly to us in support of this. There's one large exception to that, and that is employee benefits. And the only reason that exception is made is that employee benefit packages are often considered proprietary by companies and a competitive issue, and we are not going to force companies to reveal their competitive data in support of this. In addition to just providing a link to where the data is, if there's a particular component of a report or a website that you feel meets the criteria, providing some additional description and direction on that is useful. I will tell you that we've received very interesting responses over the years, and this is actually, I think, the 8th year that we've supported this particular list. We had one financial services firm, whenever we were talking about their GHG emissions, their response, and their straight-faced response to us, was that the only GHG emissions for which they're responsible are the exhalations of their employees. And so that opens up a conversation where we go back to the client or to the company and actually say, you know, there's this thing called direct and indirect emissions which are being accounted for here, and have a longer conversation. So again, we're here open to have those conversations. Next slide, please.
Did you tell them, don't drop that hair, we can split it again?
Actually, I gave them a link to the GHG protocol and an explanation of direct, indirect, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. But, and so within those 7 categories, they have varied weightings, and this is also part of the transparency for CR Magazine. There are elements like environment and climate change which, when aggregated, are much more heavily weighted than something like corporate governance. Corporate governance is basically table stakes. All companies are expected to both disclose on these issues as well as meet minimum corporate governance standards. But things like environment, climate change, employee relations, human rights, those are areas where the focus on this has been to get more companies to disclose and be more transparent. What we see year on year is an increase of data density in the data set that we're evaluating of roughly about a 15 to 18% increase every year. That's both a combination of companies that are consistently disclosing data, disclosing more, but more critically it is companies that have never disclosed data actually rolling out reports and now disclosing. When I started in this industry 14 years ago, it was an exception for a company to have a CSR report. Now it's much more common. When you look at the Russell 1000, the companies that have no data whatsoever are very clear minorities now. There is a large cap bias, as most people on this call are probably aware of, in disclosure. Those companies tend to have more resources, more available, and actually more stakeholder engagement. But we see cross caps all through the Russell 1000, an increase in disclosed data, and it is industry agnostic. Something also that we need to bear in mind with the CR Magazine rating, with the 100 best, is that this is a comparative rating. It's a non-elective comparative rating. Non-elective in that every company in the Russell 1000 is evaluated whether they choose to respond to the correspondence or not. All of the publicly available data is collected for all of those companies, integrated in the data set, and it is evaluated. The comparative in what we're doing in this rating is comparing the performance, the disclosure, the scoring of all of the companies in the Russell 1000, one against each other. So that increase in data density that I referenced, as more companies disclose more data, companies that are just maintaining the status quo actually will slide back down in the ratings, just because everybody else in comparison has gotten better in the way that they're disclosing their data. There are 2 common questions. Go ahead, Ellen.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to ask you a question on this, but go ahead and why don't you go through those, and we'll make sure if you haven't answered it that we do. It's a question that came from someone in the audience.
Okay. Well, there are 2 areas in this particular evaluation in the 7 categories, governance and financial, that tend to be the majority of the questions that I field from company calls, in part because both of those are out of the control of most CSR groups. They are elements that are the result of the company's performance or of management decisions. And both of them are concentrated categories. So that the 298 elements, the 315 total collected, the 298 rating elements, are not equally divided among these 7 categories. Some categories have more, some have less. Within a category or a subcategory, for the evaluation purposes, each data element, each rating element is treated equally. Subcategories are also weighted equally within a category, and then the categories are evaluated based on the varied percentage that you see here. And that 2012 weighting percent you see on the slide is the same for 2013, and it is going to be the same for the 2014. So question.
So one of the questions that had come from the audience was to please explain the difference between the environment and climate change categories.
Okay. Well, environment is considered an overarching umbrella category, and this addresses things, excluding climate change. It addresses things like water use, energy use, conservation, recycling, the broad umbrella of environmental issues, TRI emissions, Superfund sites, etc. Climate change was carved out and continues to be treated as a separate issue, and it focuses directly on GHG emissions, policies related to, and management programs around GHG emissions. And GHG emissions are disclosed or defined as any of the GHG protocol emissions that have been determined to have an impact on climate change. So that's CO2, that's SOx, NOx, that's methane emissions, that's your non-methane volatile organic compounds, most of your volatile organic compounds, etc. The decision was made at the behest of the methodology committee several years ago to split those two out separately, in large part because of the immediacy and the severity of the issues related around climate change.
And one of the other things, just as a comment before we move on, is as people can clearly see, 12.5% of the rating is based on financial performance. Now, it's on a horizon. We use the Morningstar 3-year index as part of the category weighting. But that accounts for some of the volatility as well, I think, in the list, that if companies have a particularly good or bad financial year, that may impact their overall score. We stand by, and this is a question we get a lot, that financial health and financial sustainability are critical to many of these others. And I did in an interview, I think, that ran in Fortune earlier this year, mentioned that you don't see companies 10 days out of bankruptcy debating their carbon footprint. So, I think the more healthy companies are, and I think the methodology committee has agreed with this, the more they have to invest and be very conscious of their citizenship and want to give back because they have the ability to give back. So that remains a significant portion, and it does contribute to some volatility, but that's a question we often get.
And related to that, again, coming back to the corporate governance category, because it is a concentrated category, and a lot of companies, and we'll talk about this in a moment, will tie for a #1 place because they have very strong corporate governance policies in place. Companies that have one negative attribute will drop very quickly down the list on the rating of governance, just because, again, it's table stakes, and there are commonly accepted standards that most companies are expected to perform to. Which brings us to tie gaps. So in this Olympic year, this model may make sense to more people, although I think it was a little bit exception because we had a number of ties actually for gold medals, which was unusual. But the way the CR Magazine, the 100 Best methodology works is if companies are tied for the same score, and then they receive that tie rank, and then there is a gap between that rank and the next available. Using the Olympic analogy, that means if two tied for the gold medal, the next available medal would be the bronze. The way it plays out in the rankings is, again, in the corporate governance category, often you'll see a number of companies with very strong governance stances that end up tied for #1. If there's 100 of those that tied for #1, the next available rank is going to be 101. And that is disclosed very clearly on the listing for the top 100. And you'll see a parenthetical tie rank for the scores for one of the categories in that list as it's provided to the public. We do receive negative feedback on this, but it is a decision that's been made, and it's been implemented for multiple years, and in my opinion, seems to actually address some of the issues related to this. There are categories where ties are very seldom encountered, and particularly in the top around 150, 175, climate and environment, climate change and environment are two of those categories. Going back earlier to what I said, though, about the disclosure, while there are very few companies in the Russell 1000 that are now just black holes of disclosure, there are a lot of companies that just have very minimal disclosure. So you will see towards the bottom of the 1000, you will see another set of ties where companies are aggregating basically for the worst score in a category. So next slide. And the final thing that is applied, and this is comes back to the citizenship nature of the list itself. There are red cards and yellow cards which companies may receive as a result of controversies that basically have originated from them through their corporate action. A yellow card basically is a significant event that occurs during the data collection year, but doesn't rise to the level of basically kicking a company off a list. In this case, companies are flagged with a yellow card, but they do remain on the list. So if you're in the top 100 and you have an activity that is not very dramatic, you may be yellow carded just as an indication that there are cautions about your inclusion. The red card is, however, it removes you from the list, and we have had companies over the years which have received red cards, and that will continue. Basically, a red card means that there's been a significant adverse event or judgment which belies the best corporate citizens moniker. So basically, by that action, the company is not a good corporate citizen. So they're removed from the list, and they are excluded from inclusion in the list for a one-year period. And,
you know, to reinforce the point that you just made, I mean, this is something that there's a lot of investigation done on, and it comes down to, you know, the only aspect of this that becomes a bit subjective. So we try to objectify it as much as possible with certain rules, and you know, it could be the adverse judgment or a company that maybe is not denying wrongdoing or admits wrongdoing. It is not just necessarily a legal judgment. I want to just be clear that it could be that they've engaged in wrongdoing, either admitted it or they haven't. There's one case that involved a company that has not denied the wrongdoing, but is arguing that they can't be penalized based on a legal technicality. And that kind of thing, you know, we have to sit down with a fairly large group and talk about, and then reach some consensus on the editorial staff about what we're going to do.
And that data is, again, those companies that are red carded or yellow carded, they're publicly disclosed, so everybody knows. And if there are questions, Fair Magazine would be happy to answer those, and IW Financial can provide supporting data on that. Last thing that I wanted to talk about, and this is the next slide, is a little bit of the trends and insights into this. So as I said, it's a comparative rating, and that means that there is change, and that is pretty much the only constant with this. In the 2013 evaluation, and remember, you guys have to wait for the 2014 list. In the 2013 set, there were 32 companies that ended up in the top 100 that jumped 20 ranks, 41 that dropped an average of 17, and there were 26 companies that were added to the list. There are some companies that have been on the list pretty consistently since 2006. There are actually about 20 of those that have been pretty consistent. But there's a lot of companies that move in and out. And down at the very bottom of the 100 is actually where most of that churn happens. And that financials performance and that corporate governance performance, those are often prime contributors to a company dropping off a list that's been on there for a while historically. The average rank increase for the top 100 as a whole was 33. And within the top 10, the average increase was 14. And what that means, and for those of you who are number crunchers out there, is actually that there were a number of companies that were towards the bottom of the top 100 that in the 2013 list actually made it up into the top 10 based on their performance. Again, that's a combination of governance and financials, but more critically for those companies was actually changes in the way that they do their disclosure. And one of the things that I always face from companies, one of the questions I'm always asked is, as a company, how can we do better on this? And one of the ways is coming back to the transparency piece. There are a number of existing standards out there, the GRI standards, the work being done by FASB, that provide guidelines for how companies can format, construct their disclosure, and what stakeholder groups are looking to see. And companies that do well in this particular evaluation also tend to have disclosure that is in line with one or more of those standards. It's really hard to have an A standard, I know it's G3, an A standard report, and not have very comprehensive transparency. So Elliot, back over to you.
Well, yeah, and thank you, Glenn. That was great. And one of the things to bear in mind is that we're very proud to see a couple of things. One is that on the whole, the 100 Best Corporate Citizen scores continue to improve, which means just the community of private enterprise has become increasingly transparent, accountable, and become increasingly better corporate citizens by the definitions that we use. So this is one of the things that we look at every year, are the scores getting better. And as you can see, the actual overall scores are really have been improving, even though it's a relative score. And also, to your point, there are 19 companies that were on the list, every year, so that's 19% of the 100, but 19 companies between 2008, when we went to this methodology, and 2012. So on a 5-year basis, they maintained their positions. Of those, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this for the Corporate Responsibility Officers Association, which is essentially hosting this as a service to its members. 7 of those companies are actually members of the Corporate Responsibility Officers Association. So I think what they're learning in the various committee meetings must be coming in handy, because I guess, Glenn, if you do the math, you only have a 1 in 10 chance of being on the 100 best out of 1,000. But if 1/3 have been on there consistently, then you're 3 times more likely to make the 100 best list if you actually are investing in that knowledge and learning. But obviously, membership and ranking have nothing to do with each other, as one's the association, the other's the magazine. But clearly, the corporate citizenship policies of a number of these companies have improved over time. Now let's talk about how you would use this methodology in business, okay? And we get asked this question a lot. It's great, we have a wonderful ranking, we're very happy, or, gee, we realize we have work to do, how do we get better? But people will come up to me at Commit Forum, for example, right after I got off the stage there, and someone said to me, well, how do I use it? How can I use it beyond going to our CEO and saying, wow, look, we're good people? And that got us thinking about just a few ways. And I talked to some of the members of the association, and they said, well, companies should use it in their supply chain. Take a metric associated with maybe it's the 100 Best Corporate Ranking, which we stand behind, and we believe it's a wonderful methodology. But it's ours, and it may just be ours, or it may be a metric that includes ours and some of the other very good ones that are out there. But assign that metric to potential partners in RFPs. So literally, let's get to the point where responsible companies want to give a preference to doing business with other responsible companies. That will make the bad actors that may be out there shape up fairly quickly. Second way is use them to benchmark against your industry sector. This listing is based on disclosure, and we don't compete companies because, for example, the carbon footprint of a logistics company may be very, very different than the carbon footprint of a consultancy. Okay, so we really need to be careful about the overall 100 best list, but we do make a sector-by-sector list available. and you can use that to benchmark. And there are custom reports where we can take your company, and they're not that expensive, and we can literally show you each question or each rating element against everyone else in your industry, okay, and get into the details of the specific data elements. And this could be useful. I know one of the companies that has gotten this report in the past used it as a way to build their strategic initiatives, okay? And that we'll talk about in just a moment. So you can also use them as a guide to which professionals to network with for CR-related knowledge sharing. If you see companies that are consistently on the list or consistently at the top of the list, these are great organizations to go to and say, well, how are you doing it? What do you do in your programs? How do you get stakeholder engagement? How do you get executive buy-in? Use this list as a way to think about and prioritize. Everyone's got, networking as an initiative for personal development, but to develop a plan around networking will make it even that much more effective. And here's a great group of companies to take a look at. And then finally, develops the strategic plans I mentioned earlier based on areas in which you want to improve your scores. So those are some just quick ideas. We have about 15 minutes left for questions. So I'm going to go and look at what we've gotten from the audience, and we have quite a few of them. So let's just give me a moment. So the question, will a copy of the PowerPoint be provided to participants at the close? Please send an email to allie.williams@sharedexpertise.com, and we'll make sure that you get it. And that was the second question. Could I repeat Allie's email address? There you go, ALLIE.williams@sharedexpertise.com. Some of the questions here, how many companies are reviewed annually? Can we share the data points that are reviewed for each organization? The answer is we do share the data points in the indexes that appear within within CR Magazine. However, we don't show anyone below the 100 best list. We don't disclose that. And then the question was, did we gather information from Glassdoor? And I think Glassdoor is to be distinguished from the governance site. Glenn, if you could just tell everyone again which governance site it is.
Yeah, the governance provider is Glass Lewis and Company. And while Glassdoor.com has some useful data on it, it is not a data source that's integrated into this particular evaluation.
Yeah, in fact, we also own one of the leading human resources magazines, and we're familiar with Glassdoor, and I just did a webinar with Glassdoor on it. That data is not verifiable. A lot of it's opinion-based from employees. So while it could be very valuable if you're looking to change jobs to see what people think of a particular company, we would not necessarily want to incorporate that into our data sets. Question of have the files been sent to prospective listees for review and comment? And the answer is that that process has been done. We are actually going to be finalizing the list later this week, and then we'll be announcing the 100 best announcement, which will, and the venue, which will take place in the latter part of April, as we've done in past years. Here's a question that there doesn't seem to be much emphasis on what companies do in the community. What about volunteer programs, pro bono support, philanthropy, and community? Why is philanthropy only 9% when we're talking about being good corporate citizens? Glenn, do you want to comment to that, and then I'll offer a comment as well.
Well, I'll take the researcher's answer to that to start out with. Philanthropy is one of those, it's a very laudable effort, but it's also something that's very hard to quantify on a peer-to-peer comparison basis, in part because there is such a disparity between the types of support that companies provide and the valuation model that they use for that particular support. The philanthropy category does include elements like total giving, and it includes particular programs that are in support of this, things like paid volunteer time, donation of facilities, etc. But it doesn't get down as much into the nitty-gritty of how a company might value particular programs and support that it's giving. Coming back to the researcher part of this, so Acme Company is a software company, and Acme donates its software to schools. Acme Company can choose to value that at retail. They can choose to value that at a wholesale value, or they can choose to value that at a cost of goods produced. And they may choose to do that different than Bravo Company or Charlie Company might. So that peer-to-peer comparison becomes very difficult at that level. So that's, from the researcher standpoint, some of the challenges we face on this.
So, yeah, and I'll comment to that as saying, you know, philanthropy, we do ask those questions, as Glenn just mentioned, on volunteer hours and in-kind giving and, you know, direct contribution. The reason that it may be weighted a little bit less, I don't see philanthropy or giving as being the only aspect of corporate citizenship. We want to also look at a number of other very important categories. And while in the past many companies have said, well, we have significant philanthropic efforts, that may or may not have you know, been juxtaposed with some other behaviors that maybe weren't as appealing. So we also want to look at companies, whether they're disclosing the areas in which they may be doing things that could be harmful or hazardous. So the reason we have a pretty heavy emphasis on environmental is this is a place where companies can either be making a positive or negative impact. And we believe companies making a negative impact are less likely to disclose it, and in fact that shows each and every year. So we look at both sides of where there's both positive and potentially negative aspects from companies doing business. And within reason, I mean, you know, to do business, companies will have to create an environmental impact. But what are they doing to actually address and minimize or replenish the resources that are being consumed? And we think that's very, very important. One of the questions, and we hope we answer that question, is with the emphasis on environmental and climate change categories, the point I just made, certain industries, i.e. Power generation, fossil fuels, have a scoring disadvantage relative to other sectors. Given this is a multi-sector survey, this skews the rankings. Can we comment on this? Well, and Glenn, I don't think it necessarily skews the rankings on a multi-sector basis, because we're not comparing the financial industries' carbon footprint to the power generation industries, for example. So we're not saying this company's good or this company's bad. We're looking more at you know, their disclosure level. So do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, there is a performance element in that category that is the carbon footprint, but it is one of a number of elements that are evaluated. And what you see with the Best 100, and we've seen this over multiple years now, is it is actually all sectors are represented. There doesn't seem to be a consistent bias within the 100 on a particular industry. Whenever I look back at the 2013 data, there were actually 10 companies that were classified as utilities that made the top 100. There were 6 that were in the energy sector that made it, 12 in materials. You get into services, there was only 1. So financial, insurance, real estate, there were only 5. Healthcare, there were only 8. So there's not it doesn't have a huge bias impact on the 100, that particular element. In part, again, because it's only a couple of performance elements in a category, and that category is one of 7 categories that the companies are being evaluated on. The sector, and you mentioned this, Elliot, the sector list, however, they do compare within a sector those companies on basically equal footing. So if you do have a concern about a potential bias, looking at the sector list to see how your company performed would actually be a useful exercise also.
For someone who just joined, and I know for some of our folks who are overseas, the U.S. going out of sync with the rest of the world has caused some confusion. This recording, this presentation has been recorded and will be available on the Corporate Responsibility or CROassociation.org website and a cross-link over to CR Magazine as well. So you can listen to this later if you missed a portion of this webcast. One of the interesting questions that just came in is, you know, via the Responsible CEO of the Year Awards, what kind of feedback do we get directly from CEOs? And I do spend quite a bit of time talking with the CEOs of major companies. In fact, the Corporate Responsibility Officers Association has formed a Responsible CEO Roundtable program. We have 5 CEOs who are currently members. We have invitations out to a number more, and I have conference calls with many of them over the next couple of weeks. We expect to have, over the next 2 years, between a dozen and maybe 20 CEOs taking part in providing C-suite guidance to the association. We know that Burson Marsteller did a study a couple of years ago where the 100 Best Corporate Citizens list ranked 3rd in importance to CEOs in that survey behind Most Admired Companies and Best Places to Work, and we're happy about that. We see some other rankings of broader groups that have a lot of NGOs and governmental types where we may rank a little lower, but we do this primarily for the business community and their behavior, so we really look at those kinds of surveys. So amongst the CEOs, they tell me that they look at the 100 Best Corporate Citizens list very closely, as well as other rankings that are out there that are important to their organization, or rankings that may be industry specific. So from the C-suite standpoint, they consider this yet another data point on the performance not only of their corporate citizenship department or their corporate responsibility officers, but really of their overall company, because it does bring in things like employee relations, and we're, you know, so you have the HR department. It does bring in governance and the legal department and financial departments. And so they really look at it as a benchmark across their entire business. So that's the answer of what we hear from CEOs, if you will. The industry lists will be coming out later this year, the sector reports, and they are not yet available. It'll be in the magazine because the top 10 by industry sector may vary slightly from the 100 best. So we released the 2 lists separately. They are based on the same data set, if you will, and that will be out later this year. Glenn, one of the questions that came in is, what are the areas that a company can focus on? And I think you addressed this, to improve its ratings for the next year. What are the sort of levers that you're most capable of moving? If you were listening to this webinar and you went away and said, okay, here's the areas I want to focus on to have the most impact, what would you tell people to do?
Well, again, the first emphasis would be on actual disclosure and ensuring that the company has available for public consumption a broad range of data, and using something like GRI or the SASB standards as a framework within which to construct that disclosure. Companies have this data, and this is one of the ironies of what we do here. Most companies, at least at some level, collect this data as part of their operational overview. It's just a matter of getting that data actually disclosed out there. There are elements that are most readily within control of a CR professional, things like policy, and actually making sure that that policy is out there and available for public consumption. Internally, these will be circulated. I've spoken to a number of companies that says, yes, we have an environmental policy, but it's in our employee handbook. We don't make it. We've never thought to make it publicly available. It's an easy reach. That's an easy one to do. The metrics, the evaluated data elements are, again, they're publicly available. And it's always one of the things I suggest companies is whenever you're looking at this, particularly those companies that are looking to disclose for the first time at a significant level, is take that list and go through and see what do you have that's sitting in somebody's computer that you could put out there very quickly. That's the type of disclosure, the low-hanging fruit to pull in. The second stage, though, is, again, because it's comparative evaluation, you can't be satisfied with the status quo. You need to continue to disclose, refine your disclosure, and keep pace with what the overall industry is. And again, the data density increase that we see year on year is between 15 and 17%.
All right, and I want to take a moment and thank everyone for joining the call. I want to thank Glenn Yelton, Research Manager for IWF Financial. I hope you found this informative, and I hope you find that you have learned something you can take back and make actionable. I'm Elliot Clark. I'm the CEO of Shared Expertise. We're the publishers of Corporate Responsibility magazine. We look forward to having you take part in our next presentation, which will be G4 and SASB. Should you put all your eggs in one basket? That's Wednesday, May 21st, 2014. It's being presented by the experts on reporting from the Brown-Flynn organization. So make sure you're here May 21st. Thank you all for your time and your attention. That will conclude this broadcast. Thank you.